Plutarch's Parallel Lives, Volume 1, The Dryden Translation. Romulus. From whom, and for what reason, the city of Rome, a name so great in glory, and famous in all the mouths of all men, was so first called, authors do not agree. Some are of opinion that the Pelasgians, wandering over the greater part of the habitable world, and subduing numerous nations, fixed themselves here, and, from their own great strength in war, called the city Rome. Others, that at the taking of Troy, some few that escaped and met with shipping, put out to sea, and driven by winds, were carried upon the coast of Tuscany, and came to anchor off the mouth of the river Tiber, where their women, out of heart and weary with the sea, on its being proposed by one of the highest birth and best understanding amongst them, whose name was Roma, burnt the ships. With which act the men at first were angry, but afterwards, of necessity, seating themselves near Palatium, where things in a short while succeeded far better than they could hope, in that they found the country very good, and the people courteous. They not only did the lady Roma other honours, but added also this, of calling after her name the city which she had been the occasion of their founding. From this, they say, has come down the custom at Rome for women to salute their kinsmen and husbands with kisses, and because these women, after they had burnt the ships, made use of such endearments when entreating and pacifying their husbands. Some again say that Roma, from whom the city was so called, was daughter of Italus and Lucaria, or, by another account, of Telephus, Hercules' son, and that she was married to Aeneas, or, according to others again, to Ascanius, Aeneas' son. Some tell us that Romanus, the son of Ulysses and Circe, built it. Some, Romus the son of Amathion, Diomede having sent him from Troy, and others Romus king of the Latins, after driving out the Tyrrhenians, who had come from Thessaly into Lydia, and from thence into Italy. Those very authors, too, who, in accordance with the safest account, make Romulus give the name of the city, yet differ concerning his birth and family. For some say, he was son to Aeneas and Exthea, daughter of Phorbas, and was, with his brother Remus, in their infancy, carried into Italy, and being on the river when the waters came down in a flood, all the vessels were cast away except only that where the young children were, which being gently landed on a level bank of the river, they were both unexpectedly saved, and from them the place was called Rome. Some say Roma, daughter of the Trojan woman above mentioned, was married to Latinus, Telemachus' son, and became mother to Romulus. Others that Aemilia, daughter of Aeneas and Lavinia, had him by the god Mars, and others give you mere fables of his origin. For to Carchedius, they say, king of Alba, who was a most wicked and cruel man, and there appeared in his own house a strange vision, a male figure that rose out of a hearth, and stayed there for many days. And there was an oracle of Theseus in Tuscany, which Arcadius consulted, and received an answer that a virgin should give herself to the apparition, and that a son should be born of her, highly renowned, eminent in valor, good fortune, and strength of body. Arcadius told the prophecy to one of his own daughters, and commanded her to do this thing, which she, avoiding as an indignity, sent her handmaid. Arcadius, hearing this, in great anger imprisoned them both, proposing to put them to death, but being deterred from murder by the goddess Vesta in a dream, enjoined them for their punishment the working a web of cloth, in their chains as they were, which when they finished, they should be suffered to marry. But whatever they worked by day, Tarquinius commanded others to unravel in the night. In the meantime, the waiting woman was delivered of two boys, whom Tarquinius gave into the hands of one Tiradius, with command to destroy them. He, however, carried and laid them by the riverside, where Wolf came and continued to suckle them, while birds of various sorts brought little morsels of food, which they put into their mouths, till a cowherd, spying them, was first strangely surprised, but, venturing to draw nearer, took the children up in his arms. Thus they were saved, and when they grew up, set upon Tarquinius and overcame him. This one from Athens says, who compiled a history of Italy. But the story which is most believed and has the greatest number of vouchers was first published, in its chief particulars, amongst the Greeks by Diocles of Peripathus, whom Fabius Pictor, who follows in most points. Here again there are variations, but in general outline it runs thus. The kings of Alba reigned in lineal descent from Aeneas, and the succession devolved at length upon two brothers, Numitor and Amulius. Amulius proposed to divide things into two equal shares, and set as equivalent to the kingdom the treasure and gold that were brought from Troy. Numitor chose the kingdom, but Amulius, having the money, and being able to do more with that than Numitor, took his kingdom from him with great ease and, fearing lest his daughter might have children, made her a Vestal, bound in that condition forever to live a single and maiden life. And this lady some call Ilia, others Rhea, and others Sylvia. However, not long after, she was, contrary to the established laws of the Vestals, discovered to be with child, and should have suffered the most cruel punishment, had not Antho, the king's daughter, mediated with her father for her. Nevertheless, she was confined, and debarred all company, that she might not be delivered without the king's knowledge. In time she brought forth two boys, of more than human size and beauty, whom Amulius, becoming yet more alarmed, commanded a servant to take and cast away. This man some call Faustulus, others say Faustulus was the man who brought them up. He put the children, however, in a small trough, and went towards the river with a design to cast them in. But, seeing the waters much swollen and coming violently down, was afraid to go nearer, and dropping the children near the bank, went away. The river overflowing, the flood at last bore up the trough and, gently wafting it, landed them on a smooth piece of ground, which they now called Curminus, formerly Germanus, perhaps from Germani, which signifies brothers. Near this place grew a wild fig tree, which they called Ruminalis, either from Romulus, as it is vulgarly thought, or from ruminating, because cattle did usually in the heat of the day seek cover under it, and there chew the cud, or, better, from the suckling of these children there, for the ancients called the dug or teat of any creature Ruma. And there is a tutelar goddess of the rearing of children whom they still call Romulia, in sacrificing to whom they use no wine, but make libations of milk. While the infants lay here, history tells us, a she-wolf nursed them, and a woodpecker constantly fed and watched them. These creatures are esteemed holy to the god Mars, The woodpecker the Latins still especially worship and honor, which things, as much as any, gave credit to what the mother of the children said, that their father was the god Mars, though some say that it was a mistake put upon her by Romulus, who himself had come to her dressed up in armor. Others think that the first rise of this fable came from the children's nurse, through the ambiguity of her name. For the Latins not only called wolves lupi, but also women of loose life. And such an one was the wife of Faustulus, who nurtured these children, Acca Larentia by name. To her the Romans offer sacrifices, and in the month of April the priest of Mars makes libations there. It is called the Laurentian Feast. They honor also another Laurentia, for the following reason. The keeper of Heracles' temple having, it seems, little else to do, proposed to his deity a game at dice, laying down that, if he himself won, he would have something valuable of the god. But if he were beaten, he would spread him a noble table, and procure him a fair lady's company. Upon these terms, throwing first for the god and then for himself, he found himself beaten. Wishing to pay his states honorably, and holding himself bound by what he had said, he both provided the deity a good supper, and giving money to Laurentia, then in her beauty, though not publicly known, gave her a feast in the temple, where he had also laid a bed, and after supper locked her in, as if the god were really to come to her. And indeed, it is said, the deity did truly visit her, and commanded her in the morning to walk to the marketplace, and, whatever man she met first, to salute him, and make him her friend. She met one named Terutius, who was a man advanced in years, fairly rich, with her children, and had always lived a single life. He received Laurentia, and loved her well, and at his death left her sole heir of all his large and fair possessions, most of which she, in her last will and testament, bequeathed to the people. It was reported of her, being now celebrated and esteemed the mistress of a god, that she suddenly disappeared near the place where the first Laurentia lay buried. The spot is at this day called Wellebrum, because, the river frequently overflowing, they went over in ferry boats somewhere hereabouts to the Forum, the Latin word for ferrying being vellatura. Others derive the name from vellum, a sail, because the exhibitors of public shows used to hang the road that leads from the Forum to the Circus Maximus with sails, beginning at this spot. Upon these accounts the second Laurentia is honored at Rome. Meantime, Faustulus, Romulus' swineherd, brought up the children without any man's knowledge, or, as those say who wish to keep closer to probabilities, with the knowledge and secret assistance of Numitor. For it is said, they went to school at Gabii, and were well instructed in letters, and other accomplishments befitting their birth. And they were called Romulus and Remus, from Ruma, the dog, as we had before, because they were found sucking the wolf. In their very infancy, the size and beauty of their bodies intimated their natural superiority, and when they grew up they both proved brave and manly, attempting all enterprises that seemed hazardous, and showing in them a courage altogether undaunted. But Romulus seemed rather to act by counsel, and to show the sagacity of a statesman, and in all his dealings with their neighbors, whether relating to feeding or flocks or to hunting, gave the idea of being born rather to rule than to obey. To their comrades and inferiors, they were therefore dear. But the king's servants, his bailiffs and overseers, as being in nothing better than themselves, they despised and slighted, nor were the least concerned at their commands and menaces. They used honest pastimes and liberal studies, not esteeming sloth and idleness honest and liberal, but rather such exercises as hunting and running, repelling robbers, taking of thieves, and delivering the wronged and oppressed from injury. For doing such things they became famous. A quarrel occurring betwixt Numitor's and Amulius's cowherds, the latter, not enduring the driving away of their cattle by the others, fell upon them and put them to flight, and rescued the greatest part of the prey. At which Numitor being highly incensed, they little regarded it, but collected and took into their company a number of needy men and runaway slaves. Acts which looked like the first stages of rebellion. It so happened that when Romulus was attending a sacrifice, being fond of sacred rites and divination, Numitor's herdsman, meeting with Remus on a journey with few companions, fell upon him, and after some fighting, took him prisoner, carried him before Numitor, and there accused him. Numitor would not punish him himself, fearing his brother's anger, but went to Amulius and desired justice, as he was Amulius's brother, and was affronted by Amulius's servants. The men of Alba likewise resenting the thing, and thinking he had been dishonorably used, Amulius was induced to deliver Remus up into Numitor's hands, to use him as he thought fit. He therefore took and carried him home, and, being struck with admiration of the youth's person, in stature and strength of body exceeding all men, and perceiving in his very countenance the courage and force of his mind, which stood up subdued and unmoved by his present circumstances, and hearing further that all the enterprises and actions of his life were answerable to what he saw of him, but chiefly, as it seemed, a divine influence aiding and directing the first steps that were to lead to great results, out of the mere thought of his mind, and, casually, as it were, he put his hand upon the fact, and, in gentle terms and with a kind aspect, to inspire him with confidence and hope, asked him who he was, and whence he was derived. He, taking heart, spoke thus: "I will hide nothing from you, for you seem to be of a more princely temper than Amulius, in that you give a hearing and examine before you punish, while he condemns before the case is heard. Formerly, then, for we are twins, thought ourselves the sons of Faustulus and Laurentia, the king's servants. But since we have been accused and aspersed with calumnies, and brought in peril of our lives here before you, we hear great things of ourselves, the truth of which my present danger is likely to bring to the test. Our birth is said to have been secret, our fostering and nurture in our infancy still more strange, by birds and beasts, to whom we were cast out. We were fed by the milk of a wolf and the morsels of a woodpecker, as we lay in a little trough by the side of the river. The trough is still in being, and is preserved, with brass plates around it, and an inscription in letters almost effaced, which may prove their hereafter unavailing tokens to our parents when we are dead and gone." Numitor, upon these words, and computing the dates by the young man's looks, slighted not the hope that flattered him, but considered how to come at his daughter privately, for she was still kept under restraint, to talk with her concerning these matters. Faustulus, hearing Remus was taken and delivered up, called on Romulus to assist in his rescue, informing him then plainly of the particulars of his birth. Not but he had before given hints of it, and told as much as an attentive man might make no small conclusions from. He himself, full of concern and fear of not coming in time, took the trough, and ran instantly to Numitor, but giving a suspicion to some of the king's sentries at his gate, and being gazed upon by them, and perplexed with their questions, he let it be seen that he was hiding the trough under his cloak. And by chance there was one among them who was at the exposing of the children, and was employed in the office. He, seeing the trough, and knowing it by its make and inscription, guessed at the business, and, without further delay, telling the king of it, brought in the man to be examined. Faustulus, hard beset, did not show himself altogether proof against terror, nor yet was he wholly forced out of all. Confessed indeed the children were alive, but lived, he said, as shepherds, a great way from Alba. He himself was going to carry the trough to Ilia, who had often greatly desired to see and handle it, for confirmation of her hopes of her children. As men generally do who are troubled in mind and act neither in fear nor passion, it so fell out Romulus now did, for he sent in haste as a messenger a man, otherwise honest, and friendly to Numitor, with commands to learn from Numitor whether any tidings were to come to him of the children being alive. He, coming and seeing how little Remus wanted of being received into the arms and embraces of Numitor, both gave him surer confidence in his hope, and advised them, with all expedition, to proceed to action. Himself too joining and assisting them, and indeed, had they wished it, the time would not have let them demur. For Romulus was now come very near, and many of the citizens, out of fear and hatred of Romulus, were running out to join him. And besides, he brought great forces with him, divided into companies each of 100 men, every captain carrying a small bundle of grass and shrubs tied to a pole. And the Latins call such bundles manipuli, and from hence it is that in their armies they still call their captains manipulars. Remus rousing the citizens within to revolt, and Romulus making attacks from without. The tyrant, not knowing either what to do, or what expedient to think of for his security, in this perplexity and confusion was taken, and put to death. This narrative for the most part given by Fabius and Diocles of Parthus, who seem to be the earliest historians of the foundation of Rome, is suspected by some, because of its dramatic and fictitious appearance, but it would not wholly be disbelieved, if men would remember what a poet Fortune sometimes shows herself, and consider that the Roman power would hardly have reached so high a pitch without a divinely ordered origin, attended with great and extraordinary circumstances. Romulus now being dead and matters quietly disposed, the 2 brothers would neither dwell in Alba without governing there, nor take the government into their own hands during the life of their grandfather. Having therefore delivered the dominion up into his hands, and paid their mother befitting honor, they resolved to live by themselves, and build a city in the same place where they were in their infancy brought up. This seems the most honorable reason for their departure, though perhaps it was necessary, having such a body of slaves and fugitives collected about them, either to come to nothing by dispersing them, or if not so, then to live with them elsewhere. For that the inhabitants of Alba did not think fugitives worthy of being received, and incorporated as citizens among them plainly appears from the matter of the women, an attempt made not wantonly but of necessity, because they could not get wives by goodwill. For they certainly paid unusual respect and honor to those whom they thus forcibly seized. Not long after the first foundation of the city, they opened a sanctuary of refuge for all fugitives, which they called the temple of the god Aslias, where they received and protected all, delivering none back, neither the servant to his master, the debtor to his creditor, nor the murderer into the hands of the magistrate, saying it was a privileged place, and they could so maintain it by an order of the holy oracle, insomuch that the city grew presently very populous, for they say it consisted at first of no more than 1,000 houses, but of that hereafter. Their minds being full bent upon building, there arose presently a difference about the place. Romulus chose what was called Roma Quadrata, or the square Rome, and would have the city there. Remus laid out a piece of ground on the Aventine Mount, well fortified by nature, which was from him called Ramonium, but now Vignarium, concluding at last to decide the contest by a divination from a flight of birds, and placing themselves apart at some distance. Remus, they say, saw 6 vultures, and Romulus double that number. Others say Remus did truly see his number, and that Romulus feigned his. But when Remus came to him, that then he did indeed see 12. Hence it is that the Romans, in their divinations from birds, chiefly regard the vulture, though Herodorus Ponticus relates that Heracles was always very joyful when a vulture appeared to him upon any action. For it is a creature the least hurtful of any, pernicious neither to corn, fruit tree, nor cattle. It preys only upon carrion, and never kills or hurts any living thing. And as for birds, it touches not them, though they are dead, as being of its own species, whereas eagles, owls, and hawks mangle and kill their own fellow creatures. Yet, as Aeschylus says, what bird is clean that preys on fellow bird? And besides, all other birds are, so to say, never out of our eyes, and they let themselves be seen of us continually, but a vulture is a very rare sight. And you can seldom meet with a man that has seen their young. Their rarity and infrequency has raised a strange opinion in some, that they come to us from some other world, as soothsayers ascribe a divine origination to all things not produced either of nature or of themselves. When Remus knew the cheat, he was much displeased, and as Romulus was casting up a ditch, where he designed the foundation of the city wall, he turned some pieces of the work to ridicule, and obstructed others. At last, as he was in contempt leaping over it, some say Romulus himself struck him, others Calais, one of his companions. He fell, however, and in the scuffle Faustulus also was slain, and Plistinius, who, being Faustulus's brother, story tells us, helped to bring up Romulus. Calais upon this fled into Tuscany, and from him the Romans call all men that are swift of feet Caleres. And because Quintus Metellus, at his father's funeral, in a few days' time gave the people a show of gladiators, admiring his expedition in getting it ready, they gave him the name of Calais. Romulus, having buried his brother Remus, together with his 2 foster fathers on the Mount Rammonia, set to building his city, and sent for men out of Tuscany, who directed him by sacred usages and written rules in all the ceremonies to be observed, as in a religious rite. First, they dug a round trench about that which is now the Comitium, or Court of Assembly, and into it solemnly threw the first fruits of all things either good by custom or necessary by nature. Lastly, every man taking a small piece of earth of the country from whence he came, they all threw in promiscuously together. This trench they call, as they do the heavens, Mundus, making which their centre, They described the city in a circle round it. Then the founder fitted to a plow a brazen plowshare, and, yoking together a bull and a cow, drove himself a deep line or furrow round the bounds, while the business of those that followed after was to see that whatever earth was thrown up should be turned all inwards towards the city, and not to let any clod lie outside. With this line they described the wall, and called it, by contraction, Pumerium, that is, post murum, after or beside the wall. And where they designed to make a gate, and where they took out the share, carried the plough over, and left a space, for which reason they consider the whole wall as holy, except where the gates are. For had they adjudged them also sacred, they could not, without offence to religion, having given free ingress and egress for the necessities of all human life, some of which are in themselves unclean. As for the day they began to build the city, it is universally agreed to have been the 21st of April, and that day the Romans annually keep holy, calling it their country's birthday. At first, they say, they sacrifice no living creature on this day, thinking it fit to preserve the feast of their country's birthday pure and without stain of blood. Yet before ever the city was built, there was a feast of herdsmen and shepherds kept on this day, which went by the name of Palilia. The Roman and Greek months have little or no agreement. They say, however, the day on which Romulus began to build was quite certainly the 30th of the month, at which time there was an eclipse of the sun, which they conceived to be that seen by Antimachus, the Teian poet, in the 3rd year of the 6th Olympiad. In the times of Varro the philosopher, a man deeply read in Roman history, lived one Terutius, his familiar acquaintance, a good philosopher and mathematician, and one, too, that out of curiosity had studied the way of drawing schemes and tables, and was thought to be proficient in the art. To him Varro propounded to cast Romulus's nativity, even to the first day and hour, making his deductions from the several events of the man's life which he should be informed of, exactly as in working back a geometrical problem. For it belonged, he said, to the same science both to foretell a man's life by knowing the time of his birth, and also to find out his birth by the knowledge of his life. This task Terutius undertook, and first looking into the actions and casualties of the man, together with the time of his life and manner of his death, and then comparing all these remarks together, he very confidently and positively pronounced that Romulus was conceived in his mother's womb the 1st year of the 2nd Olympiad, the 23rd day of the month the Egyptians called Choak, and the 3rd hour after sunset, at which time there was a total eclipse of the sun. That he was born the 21st day of the month Thoth, about sunrising, and that the first stone of Rome was laid by him the 9th day of the month Pharmuthi, between the 2nd and 3rd hour. For the fortunes of cities as well as of men, they think, have their certain periods of time prefixed, which may be collected and foreknown from the position of the stars at their first foundation. But these and the like relations may perhaps not so much take and delight the reader with their novelty and curiosity, as offend him by their extravagance. The city now being built, Romulus enlisted all that were of age to bear arms into military companies, each company consisting of 3,000 footmen and 300 horse. These companies were called legions, because they were the choicest and most select of the people for fighting men. The rest of the multitude he called the people, and 100 of the most eminent he chose for counselors, These he styled patricians, and their assembly the Senate, which signifies a council of elders. The patricians, some say, were so called because they were the fathers of lawful children. Others, because they could give a good account who their own fathers were, which not every one of the rabble that poured into the city at first could do. Others, from patronage, their word for protection of inferiors, the origin of which they attribute to Patron, one of those that came over with Evander, who was a great protector and defender of the weak and needy. But perhaps the most probable judgment might be that Romulus, esteeming it the duty of the chiefest and wealthiest men, with a fatherly care and concern to look after the meaner, and also encouraging the commonalty not to dread or be aggrieved at the honors of their superiors, but to love and respect them, and to think and call them their fathers, might from hence give them the name of patricians. For at this time all foreigners give senators the style of lords, but the Romans, making use of a more honorable and less invidious name, called them Patris Conscripti. At first, indeed, simply Patres, but afterwards more being added, Patris Conscripti. By this more imposing title he distinguished the Senate from the populace, and in other ways separated the nobles and the commons, calling them patrons, and these their clients, by which means he created wonderful love and amity betwixt them, productive of great justice in their dealings, for they were always their clients as counselors in law cases, and their advocates in courts of justice, in fine, their advisers and supporters in all affairs whatever. These again faithfully served their patrons, not only paying them all respect and deference, but also, in case of poverty, helping them to portion their daughters and pay off their debts. And for a patron to witness against his client, or a client against his patron, was what no law nor magistrate could enforce. In after times, all other duties subsisting still between them, it was thought mean and dishonorable for the better sort to take money from their inferiors. And so much of these matters. In the 4th month, after the city was built, as Fabius writes, the adventure of stealing the women was attempted, and some say Romulus himself, being naturally a martial man, and predisposed to, perhaps by certain oracles, to believe the fates had ordained the future growth and greatness of Rome should depend upon the benefit of war. Upon these accounts first offered violence to the Sabines. First he took away only 30 virgins, more to give an occasion of war than out of any want of women. But this is not very probable. It would seem rather that, observing his city to be filled by a confluence of foreigners, a few of whom had wives, and that the multitude in general, consisting of a mixture of mean and obscure men, fell under contempt, and seemed to be of no long continuance together, and hoping farther, after the women were appeased, to make this injury in some measure an occasion of confederacy and mutual commerce with the Sabines. He took in hand this exploit after this manner. First, he gave it out as if he had found an altar of a certain god hid underground, and the god they called Consus, either the god of counsel, for they still call a consultation concilium, and their chief magistrates consuls, namely counselors, or else the equestrian Neptune, for the altar is kept covered in the Circus Maximus at all other times, and only at horse races is exposed to public view. Others merely say that this god had his altar hid underground because counsel ought to be secret and concealed. Upon discovery of this altar, Romulus, by proclamation, appointed a day for a splendid sacrifice, and for public games and shows, to entertain all sorts of people. Many flocked thither, and he himself sat in front, amidst his nobles clad in purple. Now the signal for their falling on was to be whenever he rose and gathered up his robe and threw it over his body. His men stood already armed, with their eyes intent upon him, and when the sign was given, drawing their swords and falling on with a great shout, they ravished away the daughters of the Sabines, they themselves flying without any let or hindrance. They say there were but 30 taken, and from them the curiae or fraternities were named. But Valerius Antius says 527, Juba 683 virgins, which was indeed the greatest excuse Romulus could allege, namely, that they had taken no married woman, save one only, Hercilia by name, and her too unknowingly, which showed that they did not commit this rape wantonly, but with the design purely of forming alliance with their neighbors by the greatest and surest bonds. This Hercilia, some say Hostilius married, a most eminent man among the Romans. Others, Romulus himself, and that she bore 2 children to him, a daughter, by reason of primogeniture called Prima, and one only son, whom, from the great concourse of citizens to him at that time, he called Alolius, but after ages Abilius. But Zenodotus the Trezenian, in giving this account, is contradicted by many. Among those who committed this rape upon the virgins, there were, they say, as it so then happened, some of the meaner sort of men, who were carrying off a damsel, excelling all in beauty and comeliness in stature, whom when some of superior rank that met them attempted to take away, they cried out they were carrying her to Lasius, a young man, indeed, but brave and worthy. Hearing that, they commended and applauded them loudly, and also some, turning back, accompanied them with good will and pleasure, shouting out the name of Thalassius. Hence the Romans to this very time at their weddings sing Thalassius for their nuptial word, as the Greeks do Hymenaeus, because they say Thalassius was very happy in his marriage. But Sextius Sylla the Carthaginian, a man wanting neither learning nor ingenuity, told me Romulus gave this word as a sign when to begin the onset. Everybody, therefore, who made prize of a mating cried out Thalassius, and for that reason the custom continues so now at marriages. But most are of opinion, of whom Juba particularly is one, that this word was used to new married women by way of incitement to good housewifery, and Thalassia, spinning, as we say in Greek. Greek words at that time not being as yet overpowered by Italian. But if this be the case, and if the Romans did at the time use the word Thalassia as we do, a man might fancy a more probable reason of the custom. For when the Sabines, after the war against the Romans, were reconciled, conditions were made concerning their women, and that they should be obliged to do no other servile offices to their husbands but what concerned spinning. It was customary, therefore, ever after at weddings, for those that gave the bride or escorted her or otherwise were present, sportingly to say Thalassius, intimating that she was henceforth to serve in spinning and no more. It continues also a custom at this very day for the bride not of herself to pass her husband's threshold, but to be lifted over, in memory that the Sabine virgins were carried in by violence, and did not go in of their own will. Some say, too, the custom of parting the bride's hair with the head of a spear was in token their marriages began at first by war and acts of hostility, of which I have spoken more fully in my book of questions. This rape was committed on the 18th day of the month Sextilius, now called August, on which the solemnities of the Consualia are kept. The Sabines were a numerous and martial people, but lived in small, unfortified villages, as it befitted, they thought, a colony of the Lacedemonians to be bold and fearless. Nevertheless, seeing themselves bound by such hostages to their good behavior, and being solicitous for their daughters, they sent ambassadors to Romulus with fair and equitable requests, that he would return their young women, and recall that act of violence, and afterwards, by persuasion and lawful means, seek friendly correspondence between both nations. Romulus would not part with the young women, yet proposed to the Sabines to enter into an alliance with him, upon which point some consulted and demurred long, but Acron, king of the Cananian census, a man of high spirit and a good warrior, who had all along a jealousy of Romulus's bold attempts, and considering particularly from this exploit upon the women, that he was growing formidable to all people, and indeed insufferable, were he not chastised, first rose up in arms, and with a powerful army advanced against him. Romulus likewise prepared to receive him, but when they came within sight and viewed each other, they made a challenge to fight a single duel, the army standing by under arms, without participation. And Romulus, making a vow to Jupiter, if he should conquer, to carry himself and dedicate his adversary's armor to his honor, overcame him in combat, and a battle ensuing, routed his army also, and then took his city, but did those he founded no injury, only commanded them to demolish the place and attend him to Rome, there to be admitted to all the privileges of citizens. And indeed there was nothing did more advance the greatness of Rome than that she did always unite and incorporate those whom she conquered into herself. Romulus, that he might perform his vow in the most acceptable manner to Jupiter, and withal make the pomp of it delightful to the eye of the city, cut down a tall oak which he saw growing in the camp, which he trimmed to the shape of a trophy, and fastened on it Acron's whole suit of armor disposed in proper form. When he himself, girding his clothes about him, and crowning his head with a laurel garland, his hair gracefully flowing, carried the trophy resting erect upon his right shoulder, and so marched on, singing songs of triumph, and his whole army following after, the citizens all receiving him with acclamations of joy and wonder. The procession of this city was the original model of all after triumphs. This trophy was styled an offering to Jupiter Feretrius, from Feria, which in Latin is to smite. For Romulus prayed he might smite and overthrow his enemy, and the spoils were called opima, or royal spoils, says Varro, from their richness, which the word opus signifies, though one would more probably conjecture from opus, an act. For it is only to the general of an army, who with his own hand kills his enemy's general, that this honor is granted of offering the opima spolia. And 3 only of the Roman captains have had it conferred on them. First, Romulus, upon killing Acron the Canancian. Next, Cornelius Cossus, for slaying Tolumnius the Tuscan. And lastly, Claudius Marcellus, upon his conquering Viriadomarus, king of the Gauls. The 2 latter, Cossus and Marcellus, made their entries in triumphant chariots, bearing their trophies themselves. But that Romulus made use of a chariot, Dionysius is wrong in asserting. History says Tarquinius, Demaratus' son, was the first that brought triumphs to this great pomp and grandeur. Others, that Publicola was the first that rode in triumph. The statues of Romulus in triumph are, as may be seen in Rome, all on foot. After the overthrow of the Cananencians, the other Sabines still protracting the time in preparations, the people of Fidenae, Crustumerium, and Intemna joined their forces against the Romans. They in like manner were defeated in battle, and surrendered up to Romulus their cities to be seized, their lands and territories to be divided, and themselves to be transplanted to Rome. All the lands which Romulus acquired, he distributed among the citizens, except only what the parents of the stolen virgins had. These he suffered to possess his own. The rest of the Sabines, enraged hereat, choosing Tatius their captain, marched straight against Rome. The city was almost inaccessible, having for its fortress that which is now the capital, where a strong guard was placed, and Tarpeius their captain, not Tarpeia the virgin, as some say would make Romulus a fool. But Tarpeia, daughter to the captain, coveting the golden bracelet she saw them wear, betrayed the fort into the Sabines' hands, and asked, in reward of her treachery, the things they wore on their left arms. Tatius conditioning thus with her, in the night she opened one of the gates, and received the Sabines. And truly Antigonus, it would seem, was not solitary in saying he loved betrayers, but hated those who had betrayed. Not Kaiser, who told Rhymtalcus, the Thracian, that he loved the treason, but hated the traitor. But it is the general feeling of all who have occasion for wicked men's service, as people have for the poison of venomous beasts. They are glad of them while they are of use, and abhor their baseness when it is over. And so then did Tatius behave towards Tarpeia, for he commanded the Sabines, in regard to their contract, not to refuse her the least part of what they wore on their left arms. And he himself first took his bracelet off his arm, and threw that, together with his buckler, at her. And all the rest following, she, being borne down and quite buried with a multitude of gold and their shields, died under the weight and pressure of them. Tarpeius also himself, being prosecuted by Romulus, was found guilty of treason, as Jubas says Sulpicius Galba relates. Those who write otherwise concerning Tarpeia, as that she was the daughter of Tatius, the Sabine captain, and being forcibly detained by Romulus, acted and suffered thus by her father's contrivance, speaking very absurdly. Of whom Antigonus is one, and Simulus the poet, who thinks Tarpeia betrayed the capital, not to the Sabines, but the Gauls,